African countries are forming alliances, rewriting the rules of global politics. They are breaking away from old systems built to keep them weak. This is about true independence, pride, and sending a bold message to the West, a move that could redefine Africans' place in the world.
Burkina Faso and Niger have come together to form the Alliance of Sahel States.
You see, in January 2024, something happened that shook West Africa. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, three countries in the heart of Sahel, announced they were pulling out of ECOWAS.
The official withdrawal of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso from the West African regional bloc, ECOWAS.
The West African Union that had existed since 1975. By January 2025, after completing the one-year notice period, their exit became official. Why walk away from an organization built for cooperation? Well, because ECOWAS promised economic growth and stability. But for these countries, it began to feel more like punishment. After a series of military takeovers, coups, ECOWAS slapped them with heavy sanctions, closing borders, cutting trade, even freezing state assets. The real cost fell on ordinary people in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, who faced shortages of food, medicine, and fuel. It looked like ECOWAS was siding with Western powers instead of protecting its own members. So, these three countries decided enough. They created something new, the Alliance of Sahel States. And this is only one piece of the story. While the world was busy with war and elections, some African countries quietly began reshaping global power. The African Continental Free Trade Area, pushing for one united African market. BRICS continues to challenge the dollar dominance. Regional parliaments and alliances forming. African leaders shaking hands with China and Russia. All of it happening at once. But the big question remains, are some African leaders finally rising to build their own future? Or is this a dangerous gamble that could backfire? Out of all the new formations in Africa, two alliances stand out. BRICS, the global economic union that now counts Africa as a growing force. The Alliance of Sahel States, a military and economic union directly challenging centuries of French dominance in West Africa. When Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger left ECOWAS in January 2025, many thought it's just another political stunt. Three landlocked nations, each ruled by military government and cut off from Western aid. How could they possibly survive on their own? But only a few months later, they surprised everyone. They built what ECOWAS had been promising for years but never delivered. Their own central bank, investment bank. They launched biometric passports and even formed a 5,000-strong joint military force to fight jihadist threat. Together, they become more than a union. Just think about why this matters. They're taking back control. Because over the years, West Africa's main currency, the CFA franc, has been controlled by French treasury. That meant every transaction, every farmer selling cotton, every miner exporting gold, every school or road project was tied to decisions made in Europe. And when these countries turned to the IMF or World Bank for help, the conditions were often brutal. African governments sometimes paid double-digit interest rate or face strict economic reform far beyond the cheaper loans rich nations receive. Private lenders can demand as much as 6 to 10% interest, compared to around 1% from the World Bank or 2% from European government. And even then, the money comes with strings attached. Foreign contractors take the project, so the cash often circles right back out of Africa instead of building Africans' wealth. Basically, the money left Africa almost as quickly as it arrived. Across the Sahel, small farmers also struggle under this system. In Niger, microfinance loans for seeds or fertilizer often carry rates of 18 to 21% plus fees, pushing the real cost near 24%, far higher than what farmers in Europe or America face. And even after harvest, they have little say over pricing. In Ivory Coast, for example, cocoa growers are typically locked into low farm gate prices well below booming global market rates. How is a farmer supposed to feed his family in this kind of system? And the cycle repeats itself: higher cost, low returns, and families trapped in poverty generation after generation. This is what the Alliance of Sahel States is trying to change. What makes this new institution approach different is the design. Instead of relying on a currency pegged to Europe, they have talked about trying future money to the region's own gold and minerals, instead of loans dictated by outsiders. Their investment bank says it will channel funds into roads, factories, and farms that match local priorities. And when it comes to trade, the plan is to deal in African currency, not dollars or euros. It's an attempt to rewrite the rules that have kept the region dependent for so long. Africa has been told it cannot handle its own money. Now, 3 nations are saying, we will. And then came the real earthquake. The day Togo announced it was joining the Alliance of Sahel States. You see, Togo has been one of the West's most reliable allies in Africa. It hosts a US development hub. It stood firm with ECOWAS, and yet in 2025, it crossed the line to join Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Why? Because Togo has something the Sahel desperately needs: the ocean. With Togo's deep water port, the largest in West Africa, the Alliance of Sahel States body suddenly has direct access to global trade routes. No more relying on neighbors for import and export. Overnight, what had been a landlocked union of 3 becoming a coastal alliance of 80 million people with the ability to trade with the world on its own. For ordinary people, this shift could be life-changing. Imagine farmers getting loans at fair interest rate, set by bankers who understood local realities, not distant economists. Imagine gold and uranium export priced in African currency, funding African schools and factories instead of filling foreign treasures. Imagine an Africa where dignity comes not from aid, but from control. Of course, the risks are huge. These nations are under sanctions. Their economies are fragile, and powerful interests want them to fail. Western governments see the alliance as a threat to ECOWAS and also to the entire system that has kept African resources flowing cheaply to the outside world. That is why major Western media barely reported on the new Alliance of Sahel States Bank, because deep down, there is panic. If this model works in the Sahel, what is stopping East Africa or Southern Africa from doing the same? History teaches us the real change doesn't come by asking politely. It comes by creating new systems. American colonies didn't beg the British crown for better treatment. They created their own republic. And they didn't try to reform British rule in India. It dismantled it. And today, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and now Togo are trying to do the same for African finance. Now, while the Sahel built its own banking system from scratch, Africa is also stepping into a much larger stage: BRICS.
BRICS, the BRICS nations, I think that's breaking up rapidly. We said that if they're going to go and do anything to undermine the dollar, that includes China. I said we're going to put a 100% tariff on every one of those nations.
The idea started back in 2001, and by 2009, the first summit was held in Russia. In August 2023, two African nations, Egypt and Ethiopia, joined the BRICS alliance. Previously, BRICS was made up of just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But with its expansion, Africa is no longer represented by just two countries. Now, the continent has three full members: South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And beyond that, three more African nations, Nigeria, Algeria, and Uganda, have also joined as official partner countries. African nations are now part of the history of a union that rivals the G7 itself, a group of seven, the world's richest club, setting the rules of global economy. That's the United States, Canada, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. You see, back in 1995, the G7 controlled nearly half of the world's economy, with 44.9% of global GDP, while BRICS was far behind at just 16.9%. But by 2023, BRICS overtook the G7 with more than 32% of global output compared to 29.9% for the G7. And by 2025, the expanded BRICS Plus is expected to represent over half of the world's entire population and nearly half of its economy. That's a global power shift. Together, BRICS nations represent nearly 40% of the world's population. They control more than 80% of rare earth minerals, the metals needed for everything from smartphones to electric cars. And they hold over 20% of the planet's oil and gas reserve. For the first time, the West is looking at a union that has the power to change its dominance. But the story didn't end with numbers. It includes money, specifically the dollar. For nearly a century, the US dollar has been the backbone of global trade. African nations, even when buying from each other, had to convert their currency into dollars, sending every transaction through Western control banks. This gave the West enormous power to track, approve, and even block African trade. But BRICS is now challenging that system. The alliance is working on what they call the BRICS Bridge, a blockchain-based payment system that allows countries to trade directly in their local currency. Imagine a Nigerian company buying wheat from Russia or oil from the UAE without touching the US dollar. This means fewer sanctions, low cost, and more independence. The World Bank and IMF, they dictated the terms of Africans' loan, often forcing government to privatize water, electricity, or transport in exchange for credit. In the late 1990s, Bolivia was once forced to privatize its water system, leading to triple prices and families spending half their income just to survive. And this is why BRICS created its own new development bank to give loans without those conditions. And it's backing this shift with real financial alternatives. Its new development bank has already approved over $30 billion in projects, many in local currency instead of the dollar. And the expansion doesn't stop in Africa. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran has also joined BRICS Plus, bringing with them massive oil reserves and financial power to the group. That puts Egypt and Ethiopia in the same room as global energy giants and economic heavyweight. Combined with China's economy and Russia's military power, BRICS is now making a statement. But here is the key takeaway. Africa is no longer outside of this conversation. It is right in the middle of it. Ethiopia brings rapid industrial growth and a population of 120 million. Egypt connects to the world through the Suez Canal, along with South Africa, and you have three-nation voice inside one of the most powerful alliances in the world. Course, BRICS has its problems. India and China distrust each other. Brazil is politically unstable. South Africa still depends on Western investment, and even with all of their combined power, BRICS still cannot match America's military budget or the global trust in the US dollar. But the fact remains, African nations is part of a movement helping to shape the future of global finance. Africa's evolving strategy landscape now features two major global powers, Russia and China, as partners. In the Sahel, where France once ruled with soldiers and aid packages, countries like Burkina Faso and Mali have now turned to Moscow for support. Russian military advisors and weapons, combined with political backing at the United Nations, have replaced Western troops. Meanwhile, on the economic front, China's infrastructure investments across Africa are reshaping the continent. Ethiopia and Egypt's entry into BRICS reflected years of Chinese investment, from ports in Djibouti to railways linking Addis Ababa to massive power projects in Nigeria and Angola and highways in Kenya. China has funded the kind of infrastructure the West refused to fund. And BRICS expansion, it is Beijing pushing others for a new currency and for trade systems that bypass the dollar. Changes that could give Africa more room to breathe. However, this shift raises a crucial question. If this is true independence or just a shift from old master to new ones, Chinese loans often come with hidden risks, and when debts cannot be repaid, Beijing has always been accused of seizing strategic assets. Russia offers weapons and soldiers, but these come with their own price, deepening reliance on Moscow at a time of global isolation. The African Continental Free Trade Area is quietly building a common market of 1.4 billion people. If it succeeds, it could finally make it easier for a farmer in Uganda to sell milk in Kenya than to Europe. Integration has always been a dream, and now slowly it is becoming reality. The economies of Sahel are fragile. Sanctions and Western pressure will not disappear. BRICS is powerful, but it is also divided, and Africa's voice could still be drowned out by the louder giants like China, Russia, and India. African Continental Free Trade Area promises unity, but corruption, weak infrastructure, and political rivals could hold it back. And as we all know, Africa's path to independence has never been straight. Colonialism ended with decades of struggle, betrayal, and setbacks. This new revolution will be no different. So the real question is whether Africa can protect their fragile beginnings long enough to make them stick. Will the Alliance of Sahel States survive sanctions and isolation? Will BRICS give Africa real power or keep it as a junior partner? Will the African Continental Free Trade Area move beyond signatures on paper to real roads, railways, and factories that transform lives? For the first time in a long time, Africa has leverage, the ability to say no, the power to walk away from unfair deals, the courage to imagine an economic system that serves Africans first. Whether these alliances succeed or fail, they have already broken the myth that African must always depend on others. The story of a new African's future is being written right now. And if these alliances endure, they could mark the beginning of something the world has never truly seen. An Africa united, independent, and powerful on its own terms.